Okay, so we're going to talk about structures now. One way I like to think of them as like a very simple class. We haven't talked about classes yet, and we'll get to that, but this is kind of a very simple construct of a way to group some number of variables together into an object that can then be created or instantiated as a variable inside of a class. But structures cannot have functions in them. They're basically just some amount of data, and but that's all kind of grouped together into a nice package. So what we're going to go ahead and do is show you how to declare a structure. The keyword here is struct. You see our IntelliSense helps us out with that. So we'll call this element type rating. So say this is a game where you have using kind of the 4 classic elemental types for your powers. So you have spells or different weapons that are based on these powers. So here we're defining maybe a rating system or a point system that can be assigned to a character class. We'll say for the example we're going to do it's from 1 to 100. And this is basically their stats in that particular element. And so if they have a lower stat rating, then moves of that element type or powers or spells would be less powerful. So same kind of a curly brace definition here. And what we're going to do here is we're going to define 4 different variables inside of the structure. So we'll use the same variable keyword. We're going to define these as integers, so the int keyword. And we're going to define the first one as fire. And lastly, we're going to do the earth. Okay, so right there we've defined a structure. And we're saying element type rating has 4 different values inside of it. They're of the integer type. And we have given them a name of fire, air, water, and earth. So now what we have is this kind of nice little package to where we can create variables of this type. And these variables will be all kind of come with that as like sub-variables or part of that data object. And so it'll make more sense here if we go ahead and do an example of it. So we're going to define a new variable, and it is going to be of the type of structure we defined just above here. And we call that myStats. So now we have our variable of the type of structure. It's called myStats. So myStats now contains all 4 of these different variables, which have not been instantiated yet. So what we're going to go ahead and do is go ahead and give those a default value in the case of what we're doing here. So we have myStats. And to use or to access an element of a structure, you're going to use the period, which they call the dot operator in C++ style code. If you're used to C++, you'll know of pointers which use the arrow operator, and then also the dot operator works, and they have slightly different use cases in C++, but in UnrealScript, it's just everything is on the dot operator. So just throw that out there. If you're used to C style coding, just know that you're always going to be using the dot operator here. Okay, so we've got myStats, and we want to access one of the elements inside of the structure, and we just do that by name. So myStats.fire is giving us access to the integer value up here, which is named fire. So here we can assign a value to it, and we'll say 50. So we're going to go ahead and do the next one, and we have the value or air, and we'll give it a rating of 25. Water, we're going to say, you know what, this guy has no water ability whatsoever. And it's not very good when it comes to the earth element type. Okay, so we have our variable that we've defined as a structure type, and now we went ahead and set up the default kind of values. They're not really the default values, but we've instantiated values to that. So now we have valid data in each one of these 4 variables that we can access. So now an example of how you might use this and why structures are really good is because then you can pass the object around to functions as a single variable, because right now we have one variable, which is this myStats, but it has 4 different values in it. But say we had a function that was generatability. Instead of having to pass it 4 separate integer values, which would be one way to do it, and of course you need to give these a name, but instead of having to pass all that information, we can just say, you know what, just give it myStats. It's just a single variable, but yet it has all these parameters inside of it. And so now we're passing that to that function, and inside that function it can access the different elements or different variables in myStats using the dot operator like we did here. And that's going to give them, or make it a lot easier to kind of pass the data around, keeps this nice and clean instead of kind of blown out function calls where you're passing a lot of variables that you have to keep track of. So that's a really nice thing about structures. But the other cool thing is that you can still access just a single element of it. Say inside of generatability, it's running processing on all 4 of these different variables, trying to figure out maybe which ability it's going to use, or maybe the generatability basically picks your highest stat or rolls to see which ability to generate and bases the stats on the probability of it. So you might have another function inside of generatability, which is going to apply some damage value to the ability that's being created or being generated by the code. So in that case, all you really want is the fire variable, so you can actually pass just the fire portion of it as an integer to this function. Now that does assume that the declaration of this function is waiting on an integer, and in this case the declaration is waiting on the element type structure. But that's all in how you generate the functions. These are 2 simple examples of how you might call those functions. And of course we need our semicolons. So that's kind of a quick overview of the structure type. Again, it's similar to classes in that you can define any number of variables inside of it, and those are all contained inside of the object, and you can use the dot operator to access the individual variables. But the main difference is that the structure cannot have functions defined inside of it, and so it's basically meant to be a lot lighter weight, just a data container more than a functional kind of class type operation that you would use classes for.
And also with the defining the variables here or assigning them a value, this kind of, as we've been doing in the overview file, is just showing you a visual example. These variables do not have a global scope, so you cannot actually do assignment outside of a function or the default properties. So the setting up of the actual defaults here would happen down here inside the default properties. Or you could also set these inside of a function if you had a initialize stats function or something. That's where you would actually do the assignment. But this is just to kind of give you the reference to how you reference the different variables inside of the structure and kind of set up how we're going to be passing it around. But this would need to happen somewhere else.
Okay, so that kind of covers structures. And next we're going to talk about flow control statements. Let's go ahead and do that.